Well, this is only a sample of, there's a tremendous number of carbon capture bills considering how many bills get to be brought this session. But
22 to be exact.
for us, it's an imperative thing to talk about because it's a racket. It's a racket that costs us a tremendous amount of money. Both any funds that go to building out these carbon capture is usually tax dollars to the feds, and then if they want to steal your property to do the things. To me, this is like, I don't even know how many insults the government and the private mega corporations can come up with in one slam, but this is just insulting on every level to basic property rights and to the respect of the taxpayer dollar. So this is why we're camping out on this topic so heavily, because it stands to cost citizens so much money, and it
So
has
much
already.
money.
It already has.
And it's also an insult to science. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
The State of Freedom is a listener-supported podcast. We're committed to pursuing the truth about policymaking, decisions, and situations in Louisiana and at the national level that stand to impact our freedoms.
Please become a monthly supporter of the State of Freedom at freedomstate.us as we continue to expand the voice of liberty across Louisiana and beyond.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We got a lot of ground to cover today. This is part 2 of our legislative preview for the session. If you didn't catch part 1, you'll want to go back and have a listen to that. Chris, it's hard to believe that the legislative session starts Monday and it'll run through June 12th. And just a reminder to everyone that this is a fiscal session, so many of the bills will be focused in that direction. And this is also the year that the big appropriations bill comes out, and we shall see if the so-called conservative supermajority has the interest and will to make the spending cuts we need to initiate meaningful tax reform. Today, we're going to run through a wide array of issues, starting with health and the environment, energy and carbon capture, parental rights, abortion, criminal and civil justice, government transparency, government efficiency, accountability, contracts, and the DOTD. Phew, I'm
Is there
already tired.
anything, Danielle, is there anything that we're not covering today?
Not sure.
I mean,
we've got the kitchen sink in there. And if you're interested in the insurance bills, we covered the main one in part 1, and we will have an update on that today as well. But before we get going on all of that, let me start with the scripture of the day. It's 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 23 and 24. All right, let's see here. Now may the God of peace and harmony set you apart, making you completely holy, and may your entire being, spirit, soul, and body be kept completely flawless in the appearing of our Lord Jesus, the Anointed One. The one who calls you by name is trustworthy and will thoroughly complete his work in you. The scripture talks about holiness as a cooperative endeavor with the Lord. It says that the Lord is the one who sets us apart and makes us completely holy. And it's by belief in the Lord Jesus through his sacrificial death and resurrection that we are made holy. Then he goes on to encourage us to be kept completely flawless or holy. That's our part, the keeping holy. That requires spiritual discipline and ongoing partnership with the Lord, with Holy Spirit, inviting him to search all aspects of our hearts and minds and lives so that we do remain holy. It's our commitment and our surrender to this ongoing work that gives the Lord access and the ability to perfect us and make us like him. It reminds me of one of my favorite passages, which is John 15:5, that says, I am the sprouting vine and you're my branches. As you live in union with me as your source, fruitfulness will stream from within you. But when you live separated from me, you are powerless. So my encouragement today is to renew your commitment to submission and partnership with the Lord. Invite him to search all aspects of your life so you can remain holy and set apart for his purposes.
and part, Danielle, of being fully in line with Christ, Part of that is having such a relationship with Christ that we go to him when we have sinned or when we have made mistakes or when we've done things that maybe make us feel ashamed. Part of that relationship is the mercy of Christ. It doesn't, because St. Paul talks about, being perfect. He talks about being blameless. And that is an aspirational ideal that we're working toward. But we have to remember that part of being in relationship with Christ is always knowing that his mercy is available to
Yeah.
us and his healing is always available to us. Because St. Paul himself said, I find that I do what I don't want to do, and there are times when I don't do what I should do. And it's in those moments that I think we have to remember Christ's mercy, because the devil will jump right in there whenever we make a mistake or whenever we start beating ourselves up for our shortcomings, and he will try to make us feel hopeless. But we always have to remember that God's mercy and hope reign supreme and endure forever. And so let's remember that as a critical part of our relationship with Christ.
Yeah, well said, Chris. Well said. And it's always just right there. He's not distant. He's as far as you're turning right back to him. So,
Exactly. And that takes humility and honest self-reflection.
yeah. Yeah, it sure does. Well, Chris, before we jump into the rest of the bills, we've been following the governor and the insurance commissioner, Tim Temple, and we know that a lot of posturing has been going on with regards to what's being proposed for insurance reform. And in a press conference yesterday, Governor Landry said that, yeah, I did veto last year's collateral source bill after it passed both chambers, but I would be supportive of the bill this year if it was aligned with Texas's model. And that's something that, Chris, we discussed yesterday and said, well, let's dig into the Texas bill and see what's so fantastic about it. Would you, Chris, remind us what collateral source is and tell us what the Texas bill would do that's different from the proposed bill by Glorioso?
Sure. Collateral source rule, Danielle, basically says that in an accident case, the jury is not allowed to know about any uh, benefits, financial benefits that an injured party has received from an independent source. And I'll give you an example. Say you have a $100,000 medical bill as a result of the accident and the at-fault party, and the injured party's health insurance company pays 80% of that. So pays $80,000 of that $100 medical bill. So when you get to trial, is no longer that's no longer owed. Or you work out a deal with your healthcare provider, and they pay 20% of that $100,000 bill. So it's no longer owed when you go to trial. In Louisiana, the jury is not allowed to know that that medical bill is no longer owed. They are only entitled to see the original billed amount, which in this case is $100,000. And so the jury, when they're rendering a verdict, they're going to give the $100,000 medical expense to the plaintiff because they think it's owed. They
Yeah.
think the plaintiff still owes that money when in reality he doesn't. So, under a bill from Representative Glorioso that's pending in the legislature now, the jury would be allowed to know exactly what the injured party actually owes in the medical bill instead of the original billed amount. Governor Landry vetoed this legislation last year, but has recently said that he would sign legislation repealing the collateral source rule if it was similar to the current rule in Texas. So we did some research on Texas law, even talked to one of my brothers who's a lawyer in Texas. Well, Texas has the collateral source rule exists in Texas. The only time a jury is allowed to know the difference between the billed amount of a medical expense and the amount that's actually owed is if the at-fault party himself has paid it in advance or his insurance company has paid it. Okay, so if the liability carrier of the at-fault party has paid $50,000 of that $100,000 medical bill before trial, then the jury would be able to know that they paid that and the only thing that's owed is 50,000. But if it's a third party, like a health insurance provider or a workers' compensation benefit provider or something like that, the jury is not allowed to know. But the fact of the matter is, the jury should be allowed to know and base a jury verdict on what is actually owed by the injured party instead of the original billed amount. And it's fair. So Texas, if we adopt Texas's rule, very little will change in Louisiana under the collateral source because Texas has a collateral source rule currently that is very similar to the one that exists in Louisiana. So for Jeff Landry to pretend or posture as though he's making a compromise on this issue is really very hollow because there is precious little material difference between the collateral source rule in Texas and the one that exists in Louisiana.
Well, and Chris, you mentioned that the jury would be able to know that the liability company, for instance, paid half of the bill or whatever. Whether they knew or didn't know almost seems immaterial because I would imagine that the insurance company would be able to deduct the amount it owes the plaintiff from the amount that that the jury hands down because they've already paid it.
Yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous. It's ridiculous whether the jury knows or not. The plaintiff's gonna get the same amount in the end.
In the end,
That's
because
so stupid.
because it was the at fault party that paid it. Whereas under current Louisiana law, a judge is not required to make any post trial reductions based upon amounts that have already been paid. So very often, plaintiffs' lawyers and claimants go in and they're making allegations that hundreds and hundreds of thousands of medical bills are owed when they're really not, and a jury is awarding commensurate with those representations. And so it just seems like it's transparent, and really it puts the decision in the hands of the jury, which is supposed to be sovereign and supreme in the courtroom. And why that would not be disclosed to a jury and give the jury the opportunity to make that decision about what's fair and what's not, I don't understand it. So I'm eager and interesting to see if Glorioso's bill gets through the legislature, what Governor Landry does with it. Because things have changed since last year, and Louisiana citizens are being buried under these crippling insurance rates, and something has to be done. I mean, Commissioner Temple had a insurance commissioner Temple had a press conference yesterday, and there were 4 or 5 things that he directly addressed that the governor represented in his press conference that were simply not true. We're not going to get into all those right now, but it's Commissioner Temple's position that many of the legal reform bills, insurance reform bills in Governor Landry's package will do little or nothing to either bring carriers to the state of Louisiana to write coverage or to reduce the insurance premiums of Louisiana citizens. So I would like to be hopeful here, but as things look now, it's going to be a tall order getting some of these meaningful insurance reform measures through the legislature. But we're going to push very hard. And we don't agree with all of them, Danielle. We don't agree with all of Commissioner Temple's package by any means. But there are certain parts of it that we do agree with and we think are very important.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's very disingenuous on the part of Governor Landry to bring this Texas bill, this Texas collateral source up if it's basically, I mean, very almost a carbon copy of what's on our books that's not going to be changing. I find that offensive, and I also agree with Tim Temple, and we had on Dr. Fleming yesterday, right? And he also had the same general sentiment that there's a lot of posturing, but there's not going to be a lot of there, if things don't move, if there's not going to be significant will on, for instance, cuts to spending, then we're not going to be able to get to tax reform. So they can 3-card Monty us all they want with their onesie twosies over here. Let's cut over here. And don't worry though, don't look over here where we're going to be adding taxes. And the same is true of this insurance game.
Yeah, 100%.
He can call it a balancing act all he wants. If you try and run this down the middle instead of doing what's right, you're going to end up with nothing in the end.
Yeah. And remember, Danielle, Secretary Fleming or Treasurer Fleming told us yesterday, 2 things. He doesn't really feel that the legislature and the governor have the will at this time to do what's necessary to make the kind of cuts and streamline the government that's necessary. And interestingly, and I guess I should be surprised by this, but I really wasn't all that surprised, as important as it is, that the treasurer has not been included in the Doge process, in the process whereby they're supposed to be really hammering down on all of this grift in our system and returning money to the taxpayers and making the government more accountable to the taxpayer. Fleming has not been included in that process at all and has heard nothing about the process. And that is a huge red flag.
It's a huge red flag. And I also would like to put the legislators on, I don't want to say on notice. I would just like for them to start really strongly considering if they're going to be supporting the needs of the state, if they're going to be answering the call of their constituents, they need to position themselves to be ready for a veto override session, because the will of the people must be done in this session when it comes to insurance and when it comes to fiscal accountability and transparency.
Yeah. The
Because
demand of the people's there.
otherwise we will primary them all.
Yeah. And the demand of the people is clearly there. I mean, I would say in 2023, when John Bell Edwards overrode the law that would prohibit transgender mutilation of minors in the state, there was massive public outcry for a veto override session. And I would say that the outcry over having a veto override session, if Governor Landry vetoes some of these important bills, will be second only to that public outcry, because there will be a lot of demand and clamor for a veto override session. So that's a great point.
Yeah. All right. Well, on to the topics of the day. Let's start out with the bills related to health and the environment, Chris. There are some really great ones here that I am excited about. So, as salty as we seem starting out this episode, know that we are excited about quite a number of bills, and there seem to be more good ones than bad ones. And the bad ones, well, we'll talk about them too. But the first one is great. It SB 2 by my senator, Senator Mike Facey, and it is getting the fluoride out of our public water systems once and for all. So great.
Absolutely. And it's very, very simple. It prohibits the fluoridation of any public water system in the state of Louisiana. No more fluoride in the water. Katie, my wife, as you know, Danielle, is convinced that fluoride is poison in the water. And to remove that is a great, great step to protect and preserve our public health. So it's a great bill and very simple and very straightforward. I don't know why conservative legislators I don't know why this would be controversial.
Yeah, I talked to Senator Facey about this yesterday, and he said that there's been some outcry from the dentists, and the response has been, well, we can't, if you're calling this a medical substance, we're giving it without informed consent to every single person in the water system who consumes water from the water system. So it's really unlawful for them to have it in the water to start with.
That's such a great point, especially to the extent that it's harmful to
Yeah,
your health.
exactly.
Why would the normal informed consent provisions not be applicable?
Exactly. All
That's a
right.
great point.
It is a great point, and I could camp out here for a little while, but since we have so much to get through, I'll keep us rolling. All right, next up is SB 14 by Senator Patrick McMath, and he was recently down in Homa promoting this bill, kind of call it his Maha bill. He's trying to get the dyes, chemicals, and seed oils out of children's lunches in public schools. And Chris, you said it even extends to private schools that receive public money.
Yeah. Any private school, not only public schools, but any private schools that receives public money,
Which is all of them now, right? With this Gator Fund, right?
the vast majority of them, yeah.
Yeah.
And so prohibit them from serving foods to kids that have these dangerous poisonous additives in it. It requires manufacturers to state specifically what's in the food or the consumables that the kids are eating. It requires pediatricians to take continuing education courses on the issue. It requires restaurants to display on their menus if they put seed oils in the food. And interestingly, Danielle, it prohibits the use of SNAP benefits for underprivileged kids. They get what's called Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits. And the bill would prohibit the use of that money for any carbonated drinks, any soft drinks that
Great.
would be completely off limits.
That's
And
great.
I think, Danielle, if I'm not mistaken, I think this was the bill that I read yesterday that Bobby Kennedy may actually be in Louisiana for this bill,
Really?
possibly to testify for this bill. So it's a very important bill, and I think it's past time. And this is Senator McMath.
Awesome. And there's another one in the Senate very similar to it, Chris, SB 117 that Blake Miguez is bringing. It's a little trimmed down seeming from McMath's version, but it's getting the ultra processed foods, dyes, chemicals out of kids' school food, right?
That's exactly right. And this bill requires the Department of Education to post on its website that specifically how it is complying with the provisions. And so that's important. So that there's an accountability measure in Senator Miguez's bill, SB 117, that doesn't exist in Senator McMath's bill. Perhaps that could be amended, but his bill specifically requires transparency and compliance accountability on the part of the Department of Education. So they're very similar bills, but not identical.
Well, that's fantastic. And maybe Treasurer Fleming can get that reporting up through his new system that's reporting on all the school performance and everything else,
That
spending
would
and
be great.
likewise. Yeah, I hope they trade notes on these and just get the best of everything into a single bill.
Yeah, me
That
too.
would be the way to go. All right, next one up is with Senator Facey again, SB 46. And this one, a lot of you have heard of chemtrails. A lot of you have probably been very interested in wanting to know how the heck we can get rid of that and start clearing up our skies. And Senator Facey is seeking to do that. This bill would ban geoengineering and weather modification, Chris.
Yes, and anybody who doesn't think that these chemtrails is going on, I think is delusional because it certainly is occurring and it's occurring far more often and more frequently than many people even realize or understand. So this bill would prohibit the introduction of any substance in the atmosphere for the express purpose of modifying the weather, the temperature, the climate, or sunlight. And it's so important that we address this issue in Louisiana. I know Tennessee's addressing it, other states are addressing it, but they're essentially poisoning us with this geoengineering. What the purpose of it is, I don't know exactly. I guess it is to modify the weather. I guess it is to try to control the weather. But this would outlaw it in the state of Louisiana.
Yeah, and Kim Coates has one like it, Chris. You said hers maybe has some stronger provisions in it, and hers is House Bill 608.
Yeah, and her bill specifically prohibits the federal government or the armed forces from engaging in any kind of chemtrail activity over in Louisiana skies, and provides penalties if there is any type of an unmarked or unidentified aircraft in the sky that's not readily identifiable and sourced that is carrying out these activities, whether it's geoengineering, weather modification, cloud seeding, or any other atmospheric pollutants that are being pushed out of these planes. And another thing that distinguishes her bill from Senator Facey's bill is that there are very significant criminal penalties in her bill. For a first violation, you get a mandatory cease and desist order from law enforcement and up to 6 months in prison and $1,000 fine. But listen to this, Danielle. For a second or subsequent violation, you can get a fine of $500,000 and you can do 2 years in prison.
Dang.
And yeah, and per violation, and
Whoa.
each day of activity, each day that someone does this illegally is considered a separate violation. And so, can you imagine how quickly this could stack up if for people who are engaged in this activity illicitly?
It would
So,
certainly make people think twice about driving that plane.
I'm telling you right now, it's her bill is a little bit stronger. You brought up something earlier about this bill before the show
Yeah, I
that
did.
I didn't even think of.
Yeah, we were discussing this, and I said, well, maybe we're putting ourselves in a position where we are unintentionally limiting our ability here, because you think back to the 90s. There were Walt Disney put out videos. They're available on YouTube still. You can see them, showing that this weather modification technology was developed to be able to move hurricanes out to sea. That was one of the main reasons, or one of the main benefits they talked about it. Now, of course, we feel like there are bad actors who are controlling the weather, or manipulating the weather in some way. And obviously the converse of that has happened, with weather being worse everywhere. And I think, and then they put the nice little sticker on it called climate change. But what if good people were in a position to move hurricanes out to sea? Would a bill such as this have our hands tied when it comes to that? So it's just a question. I don't know the answer to it. But similarly, I've also heard, had 107 come on the show a couple weeks back, and the purpose of the show was, or the purpose of him coming on, was to talk about chemtrails. We never even made it to that part of the discussion, but we will be having him back on soon to talk about that. But one thing he mentioned to me off air was that they are using, the military does use this is my understanding. So people who are more informed on this will get the point finer, but just my rough understanding is that they're releasing these particles into the air. A lot of times, it seems to be aluminum, which is really bad for our health, but that reflects back onto the satellites, and it serves as kind of a missile defense system for the U.S. That may speak to the military involvement in this. Now, do they need to change out what kind of particles they're using so that they're not toxic to humans? But is that something we necessarily want them to stop if there's some serious concerns with some of our adversarial relationships, like Russia, China, Iran? So I just asked a question. I don't think that I'm certainly not going to stand in the way of this legislation. I think it's fantastic. I think that chemtrails are likely doing more harm than good right now, for sure. But I wonder if there should be provisions for good actors in this with non-toxic materials.
Yeah, because there may be times, Danielle, when, because of exigent circumstances, imminent threats to the country, for instance, from adversaries, that this type of activity may be necessary on a limited basis. And so there should be an exception in the bill, I think, that provides for that. And I think you make a great point. Of course, if there's a federal national emergency declared under a circumstance of extreme exigency, then the national emergency would trump this legislation anyway. But if that's not the case, as the law stands now, even federal authorities would be precluded under this law from engaging in those activities. In fact, there's a provision in the bill which says that if they are doing so, then our law enforcement is required to notify them that they're breaking the law in
Yeah.
Louisiana. We have to notify the federal government that they're breaking the law. So I think that's one potential vulnerability of the bill that probably needs to be addressed.
Yeah. And I do think that we should put some provision in there that in any case, if there is an exception, they have to use proven non-toxic material.
Yeah.
Because spraying aluminum on the population has obviously led to a huge spike in dementia, Alzheimer's, all kinds of inflammation. And that is a proven fact. Anyway, we can probably move on from there, but
Yeah. Of
that's
course,
a very,
if you go to Google, Danielle, you realize, and you look up anything about chemtrails, according to Google, and every article you'll read on Google, it's not chemtrails, it's just contrails.
right.
It's just the natural exhaust that you're seeing that's coming out of the back of the jets. Well, is that why it hangs in the air for hours? This
It's all that
natural
aluminum has just created the tinfoil hat that I wear,
exactly.
right?
So don't do your research on Google
Yeah.
on this issue.
Yeah. The secret to losing weight 2 times faster has gone viral. See the transformations hundreds of thousands of people are experiencing around the world with the Slenderize drops. These homeopathic drops are proven to control appetite, support thyroid function, help balance the body's pH, improve energy, boost mood, and increase metabolic rate. I've heard firsthand testimonials from droppers in their 20s to droppers in their 80s who say that the slenderized drops have completely revolutionized their lives. Try the drops today to see the results for yourself. To learn more about the slenderized drops or other incredible natural wellness and lifestyle products, email me at info@freedomstate.us and put drops in the subject line, or visit the Shop Our Partners page at freedomstate.us. We also have links to those in the show notes. Thank you for supporting the state of freedom. Absolutely. All right. We can switch gears from here, Chris, and go on to energy and carbon capture, which there's some pretty interesting stuff on both of these topics. And it sounds like the legislature has read the room on some of these issues. So that's great to see. First up is House Bill 583 by Representative Jacob Landry. And my short take on it, Chris, is that it codifies the reprioritization of energy independence in Louisiana based on reliable and effective energy instead of so-called renewable or green or clean energy, and in favor of reliable energy over green energy.
That's exactly right, Danielle. And the bill requires the Department of Energy in Louisiana and Natural Resources to work with the Public Service Commission in order to ensure that the state's energy sources are domestically produced to the maximum degree possible and not produced by some foreign entity, which is very important. Uh, Also, it seeks to make sure that our energy in Louisiana is affordable. I mean, quite frankly, people's electricity bills in this state are through the roof. That is probably the second biggest concern to the insurance rates. So the fact that this legislation focuses on making energy more affordable in Louisiana is very, very important. And it does include, Danielle, the bill does include energy that is provided by hydrocarbons, which is green energy and renewable energy sources as well. So, to the extent that these alternative energy sources can provide energy, which many people are very skeptical about the extent to which those energy sources are reliable, but they should be included within the parameter of the legislation to the extent that they provide energy. And so I think that's important. And then there's one other provision in here: grid stability. The bill requires the Department of Natural Resources, working in conjunction with the Public Service Commission, to make sure that our grid is stable and not vulnerable to external attacks. I guarantee you that the people who are trying to dismantle our infrastructure in Louisiana and in the United States generally, our grid stability, I guarantee, is one thing they're looking at. Because if they can knock out our grid, we're in trouble.
Yeah, and I certainly hope that the Department of Natural Resources is in close contact with Colonel Tommy Waller, because he knows a ton on this topic. He may be one of the foremost experts in the country on it, and he's a resource they need to tap into to make sure they get it right the first time.
Nobody, very few people know more than Tommy Waller, and they would do well to use him as a resource for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay, next up is House Bill 615 by Rep. Brett Guyman, and this is a solar bill. And look, we're supportive of this because it's positioning the localities to be in the driver's seat for a change when it comes to having solar farms on their land. This is a nice shift.
Yeah. This is a bill that provides regulations for the development of solar power facilities, solar power generation facilities. And it would be under the Department of Natural Resources in Louisiana. And importantly, it empowers local municipalities to make determinations about what is appropriate and what is not appropriate in their parishes. It allows local municipalities to enforce and to enact regulations, even if those regulations are more strict than regulations that would be imposed by the state. And to the extent that I'm always for, and I know you are, Danielle, I'm always for local authorities being able to have more control and more power over
Yes.
what goes on within their jurisdiction. And I wish that our legislators more often had that as a paramount concern. But when it comes to the development of solar power in Louisiana, local jurisdictions will be empowered to make most of those regulatory decisions and empowered to decide the parameters within which those facilities will be allowed to operate within their parish. I wish that hopefully Chuck Owen's bill, even though this isn't about CCS, Chuck Owen's bill on carbon capture sequestration essentially does the same thing. It gives complete authority to the localities to determine whether they want carbon capture sequestration in their parishes. So there's a parallel here with that bill, even though it deals with a different issue. Also, an important part of this bill is that it requires, before a solar power permit is issued, public notice within the parish so that the public can participate in the process, register their objections and their concerns. So who knows? Maybe our legislators have learned something from the way that the whole CCF carbon capture debacle went down in the legislature and all the pushback on that. I wouldn't be surprised if to some degree this bill is motivated because of that pushback on that other issue.
Yes. And, we were interested as well to see the same provisions given to wind, because there's people are not happy to see those wind farms either. They don't want them in the Gulf. They don't want them killing the wildlife in the Gulf, the fish or the birds. And I think a bill like that seems like it may not happen this year, but I think Rep. Guyman said that he intends to bring something along those lines
Yeah,
next
and it's
year.
important next year. And it's important right here, Danielle, for people to understand that both carbon capture sequestration and the windmill legislation sailed through our legislature or endorsed as public policy goods with almost no debate. There was no legislative debate on the merits of these windmills or on the merits of carbon capture sequestration. And I think that is what is very upsetting to many Louisiana citizens, to have this imposed on them without any opportunity to be heard on it.
Well,
And
especially
yeah,
when there are legislators who stand to gain financially from both of those industries.
absolutely. Absolutely. Legislators and lawyers.
Yeah, there you go. All right, next up.
Well, let me say one more thing,
Yeah,
Danielle, about
sure.
this bill. It prohibits any solar generation facility, energy facility, from being developed or owned by any foreign adversary. That's something that should almost go without saying, but that's in the bill as well.
Great. Okay, next is House Bill 380, and this is switching over to this concept of carbon capture, carbon dioxide sequestration. And Rodney Shammerhorn is looking to just remove eminent domain authority for CCS, which has been a long time coming, and we've tried a couple times before, Chris.
Yeah, we have tried a couple of times before and twice before to repeal eminent domain for carbon capture sequestration. And both times, the legislation was killed in a Republican dominated House Natural Resources Committee with no word or no input from the governor. And so this is a third time. Maybe the third time will be a charm. And just for the benefit of our listeners, Danielle, what eminent domain is, it's derived from Article 5 of the United States Constitution, and it allows the government to acquire the use of private property for critically needed infrastructure, for water systems, for bridges, for other things that benefit the public as a whole. And there are certain steps that you have to go through, and you have to make sure that the property owner is fairly compensated when that occurs. But under current law in Louisiana, eminent domain is authorized to be used by private corporations to acquire the use of private property against the homeowner's will to put these carbon capture projects and pipelines on their property. It's absolutely outrageous. It's a fundamental assault on private property, a core private property interest. And this legislation by Representative Shammerhorn will repeal eminent domain for CCS in Louisiana across the board. It's a very good piece of legislation. If people want CCS on their property, they should be free to accept it and to have it and to work out a deal. If they don't want it, there is no circumstance in which a private company should be authorized to seize the use of their property for a private enterprise, particularly when that enterprise is subsidized with their money, their taxpayer money. It is just it's a horrible racket. An eminent domain, CCS is a horrible racket to begin with, but eminent domain is something that is just absolutely repugnant. So Representative Schamerhorn is bringing this bill to repeal that. And hopefully, Governor Landry will come in and express his support for this very important piece of legislation.
Yeah, he absolutely should. And Chris, as you were talking, I was reminded of, I believe it was the 2023 session when then Senator Jean-Paul Cousin was, I think, the head of the Senate Natural Resources Committee. You testified, and he rammed this bill. I mean, he just made the up-down vote happen so quick, and really, I didn't appreciate the way that bill was handled at all, because we could have already been done with this. But now Senator Cousin is now Public Service Commissioner Cousin, and so he holds an even greater weight of responsibility when it comes to matters of energy security in our state. So I hope that he's changed his tune on this type of topic. I don't know how much he actually has to do with this aspect of it, since carbon dioxide isn't energy producing, but I'm sure there's some aspect of it that's still touched through the Public
Sure,
Service Commission,
sure. Yeah,
especially with this eminent domain.
I'm sure. And keep in mind that even though you're exactly right, Danielle, even though Representative Cousin was instrumental in killing this legislation in 2023, said when he was running for the Public Service Commission that he's on record saying that he is opposed to carbon capture, sequestration, and eminent domain. So hopefully, if he's true to his word, to the extent that this would come under the purview of the Public Service Commission, hopefully he will be faithful to that commitment when he was running for the Public Service Commission.
Great.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot. It seems this session, I mean, there are so many bills related to carbon capture that a lot of people's minds have either been changed, because they were open to change, or because their constituents really, really made it impossible for them not to change their position on it. So that's encouraging. It's encouraging. And it's just another reminder, Chris, that our voices matter, that people absolutely need to be in conversation with their representatives, letting them know what issues are most important to them and letting them know where they stand. Because if they don't know, they will vote however they want, or they will vote however they're told from other people. So get your voice in
Absolutely.
there, get it in there.
Absolutely. Especially if they're benefiting from it in
Yeah.
some way,
Yeah.
which typically they are. So I think that the reason why these bills sailed through when making carbon capture, legal and eminent domain and the wind farms, a couple of reasons. The first reason is that many of the legislators, I don't think, fully understood the issue when they voted on it. Secondly, some of the legislators, in all likelihood, are benefiting from it financially in their own right. And thirdly, the citizens were not there opposing it because the citizens didn't even understand it and know what was going on. So it's a new day now. The citizens are awake. And while money is powerful, it's not more powerful than the collective voice of Citizens United.
Yeah, and I certainly do hope, Chris, that the federal funds for this are drying up fast and furiously. And I believe, we have every reason to believe they probably are. But some of these horses have left the gate, and so it's going to be up to the
Yeah,
citizens to decide if they want this in their
absolutely.
states, in our
Hopefully.
states.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully, if Owen's bill passes, which we'll get to, at least the local jurisdiction will be able to make that decision.
Yeah, you're so right. Well, before we get there, let's talk about House Bill 396 by Rep. Danny McCormick. This is one of my top faves of the entire session that we're going into. And he just says, you know what? Carbon dioxide sequestration is illegal in Louisiana. That's what he's trying to put forward. I think it's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's elegant, straightforward.
Danny McCormick is one of these guys that does not waste even one word. He's rarely does he put together a bill that's more than a page or two. It's very simple, very straightforward. If this bill passes, carbon capture sequestration in whatever form, in whatever place in Louisiana will be illegal. Now, I'm not going to wager on what the likelihood is of this bill passing, but I guarantee you a substantial majority of Louisiana citizens would support it and do support it. So even if it doesn't pass, and hopefully it will certainly require these legislators to go on record regarding how they stand on this issue and really flesh out their position, because knowledge is power.
Yeah. And I certainly hope it does pass, because what it would convey is that we do not want our tax dollars spent on a racket, which we all know that this is a racket. Because if the government, if energy companies that are doing carbon capture truly cared more about the environment, they would just be planting trees. You don't have to do an industrial project to save the environment. You can go back to the 1985 model and every year before that, which is plant a tree.
Plant a tree, exactly. And, not to belabor anything, Danielle, but what I have a hard time getting my arms around, it's just staggering to me, is that they're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars of our money to engage in a process that theoretically captures carbon dioxide from the sky and buries it in the ground.
It's
Right
stupid.
now, yeah, right now, in order to protect the environment. Right now, the atmosphere is 0.04% carbon dioxide, less than one half of 1%. Of that less than one half of 1%, 5 to 6% of it is caused by the activity of men, human activity. And they're doing all of this because of that. It is a racket. It is an experimental, unscientific racket whereby companies are going to make billions of dollars of our money, and Louisiana citizens are going to be left holding the bag. So I hope that McCormick's bill passes and we outlaw this entirely in Louisiana.
Yeah, because it's complete insanity. It's just stupid.
It is.
And our favorite, one of our favorite reps, Danny McCormick, as you just said, has another bill, House Bill 522, which I think is probably his fallback position if making it illegal doesn't go through.
Yeah. And in this bill, HB 592, would simply impose a moratorium on all carbon capture sequestration activities in Louisiana. And this is a quote from the bill: in order to allow for the study of risks to security and private property rights associated with carbon capture sequestration. And if there was ever a great reason to impose a moratorium on this, he states it right there in the bill. So, and I think it is his fallback position. At a minimum, we should suspend it while we really study this issue and its merits. And so hopefully this one will get pushed through and to the governor's desk.
Awesome. Okay. Next up is House Bill 4, and you've alluded to it already, Chris, by Chuck Owen. And this is basically putting the localities back in charge of carbon capture as well.
Yeah, and this was a bill in 2023 that was put forward, I believe, by Representative Sherman Mack then. And I got into a direct exchange with the chairman of the committee, then Representative Couson, and we got into a pretty heated exchange about the extent to which, under basic principles of federalism, the state government can impose this racket on every parish in the state against their will, even if the local authorities and the people don't want it. And that bill then, this bill now, was killed in the House Natural Resources Committee by Republicans. So here it is with Representative Owen, and all it says is that local jurisdictions, local government authorities have the power to make the decision about whether or not they want CCS in their parish, either by a direct vote of their councils or a state or a parish-wide vote of the citizens. Each parish should be able to make that determination for themselves. So it makes sense both in terms of the moral aspect of the issue, and also in terms of what we're supposed to believe as constitutional conservatives, that the government that governs most locally governs best. So let them make the decisions about what most profoundly affects them. Let them make those decisions for themselves. And again, I don't know whether or not this is going to be controversial, but it certainly should not be.
It should not be. Absolutely should not be. And House Bill 304 is not dissimilar to this one, Chris. It's talking about carbon capture and expropriation claims as well. Would you get into that one?
Yeah, assuming, Danielle, you get to a point where these carbon capture companies or these energy companies have received permits to put these CCS facilities on private property. They have to have, an expropriation hearing. And Representative Carter's bill would require the hearings where they're determining whether or not they can seize these people's property. These hearings have to occur in the parish where the property is located, so that the local citizens and the local property owners can be heard on the issue. And I think that's very, very important. Assuming again that these projects, one or more, go forward or are anticipated to go forward in these parishes, have these hearings in the parishes where the people are going to be the most affected and the property owners are located.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great bill. And if people are wondering, why are they talking about so many carbon capture bills? Well, this is only a sample of, there's a tremendous number of carbon capture bills considering how many bills get to be brought this session. But
22 to be exact.
for us, it's an imperative thing to talk about because it's a racket. It's a racket that costs us a tremendous amount of money, both any funds that go to building out these carbon capture is usually tax dollars to the feds, and then if they want to steal your property to do the things. To me, this is like, I don't even know how many insults the government and the private mega corporations can come up with in one slam, but this is just insulting on every level to basic property rights and to the respect of the taxpayer dollar. So this is why we're camping out on this topic so heavily, because it stands to cost citizens so much money, and it
So
has
much money.
already. It already has.
And it's also an insult to science.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, there's so I don't even almost science is an insult to science right now.
Well, that's true. It's an insult to true science.
Yeah,
Not the Anthony Fauci quote, "Follow the science" narrative.
right.
No, not what the quote unquote scientists who are bought and paid for are saying, but what real scientists who are doing real research say about this issue. And increasing numbers of them are saying this is just a hoax. This whole thing is a complete hoax. It's interesting, Danielle, you mentioned the number of bills on this. I think it's a total of 22 carbon capture sequestration bills that'll be pending. We've chosen the ones that we believe are the most critical, but there are a number of other ones. And the vast majority of them, almost all of them, are designed to either limit, restrict, or eliminate carbon capture in Louisiana. And why do you think that is? It's because they have heard from the people, and the people are outraged by this. And so they are getting the message, and that's the reason why this legislation is being put forward.
Yeah. Well, Neil Reiser has a great bill, House Bill 632, also related to carbon capture, and it basically establishes that mineral potential is more valuable than carbon capture when it comes to your property.
Yeah, it basically says, how a lot of landowners, like my Katie's parents up in St. Francisville, they own land in St. Francisville, and say they wanted to give a mineral servitude and allow someone to come in and explore and develop minerals on their property, for a payment, for a royalty. They could allow that to happen. Representative Reiser's bill simply prioritizes the right of contracting parties over carbon capture sequestration. So, carbon capture sequestration, to the extent that it would disrupt an existing agreement between a landowner and a third party, or even if the landowner themselves is developing the minerals on the property, carbon capture sequestration takes a back seat to that issue. And that's the way it should be, because
As it
that
should.
also goes to property rights.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, we are going to shift gears pretty strongly here to parental rights. And House Bill 400 is being brought by Representative Emily Chenevere. This is a bill that I believe Representative Dodie Horton brought last year. Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is putting parents back in charge of their children's medical decisions, because right now in Louisiana, a minor literally has legal authority through some, I don't even know how this was allowed to happen, but minors have legal authority to make their own medical decisions,
Yeah.
including this went all the way through kind of the trans surgeries and minors discussion.
Yeah. So before the trans prohibition was passed in Louisiana, this law, current law in Louisiana, would have included even that. A minor to go in and provide unilateral authorization on their own behalf to get surgical procedures done and medical procedures done on them without the knowledge and consent of their parents. And I'm sure that our listeners are probably going, you got to be kidding me. This is the state of Louisiana. You can't, a minor can't make that kind of decision without the knowledge and consent of their parent. Yes, they can in Louisiana. And I have not done the research on the history or the origin or the legislative intent of that bill, but it's a monstrosity in the state of Louisiana. And you're right, Danielle. Dodie Horton brought the bill last year and pulled it, I believe, on the House floor because Dr. Abraham, who's the Secretary of the Department of Health in Louisiana, was opposed to it for one reason or another. And I think overall he's done a good job, but she pulled it for that reason. But this bill by Representative Shennefier would repeal existing Louisiana law and provide that informed written parental consent is required before any type of surgical or medical procedure is performed on a minor in Louisiana. Seems like a no brainer, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does seem like a no-brainer. Hopefully they'll be able to get this through this session. There was some concerning language about abortion in this bill, Chris, that you and I have discussed. We haven't gotten to the bottom of that yet, but just a flag there.
Yeah, there are three major exceptions to the requirement of parental consent for a minor. One is if the minor is seeking an abortion. An abortion is illegal. Abortion is illegal in Louisiana, first of all. And secondly, why would that type of a procedure, if any other medical or surgical procedure would require informed parental consent for a minor, why would not the taking of an unborn life require informed parental consent? That doesn't make any sense. And maybe there is a reason for it. We don't know. We haven't spoken to Representative Chenevert, but hopefully, if there's not a good reason for it, which I can't imagine there would be, that will be pulled out. There's also an exception for a minor who's been judicially emancipated, which means he's an adult for legal purposes, or if they are a member of the armed forces and serving in the U.S. military. Those would be exceptions to the rule. But overall, it's a very good bill, and it is past time that horrible law be repealed in Louisiana. So we congratulate Representative Chenevert for bringing the bill.
Don't you have to be 18 to sign up for the military?
That's a good point too. I think you have. I think you do. Now, if there are exceptions where sometimes they do allow a 17-year-old, maybe a 17-year-old who's been judicially emancipated. I don't know exactly what the admittance requirements are for the military, but maybe there are circumstances where a minor could be allowed into the military, and maybe that's
Okay.
why it's there. But overall, I think it's a very good bill and a very important bill.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's high time that parents regain this right in Louisiana. Absolutely. Okay, next up is an abortion bill, which we are strongly opposed to. This is a bill that's been brought several years in a row. I think, Rep. Delisha Boyd had brought it. I think she brought it last time as well, Chris. And this is kind of the famous exception to the abortion law with respect to rape and incest.
Yeah, and I think the only bill that possibly has been brought more in the legislature over the past few years than the cell phone cockroach bill is this abortion bill.
Yeah.
And what our bill does, it doesn't say that abortion is allowed in circumstances, of rape or aggravated rape or situations like that. It's basically says that that's not an abortion. And so therefore, it should be legal in Louisiana if a pregnancy results. And these are heinous crimes. I mean, and believe me, I do not lack compassion for any young lady who becomes pregnant as a result of that circumstance at all. In fact, the thought of it enrages me. But I don't believe that we compound one act of evil and immorality with another. And as difficult as the circumstance may be, calling something not an abortion when it clearly is, and punishing and penalizing an unborn child for the circumstances of their conception is not the solution. And that's not how we should approach this. So we are, as you said, adamantly opposing this legislation. Hopefully it will not get out of committee, but I would imagine that it'll be back next year.
It's just really sad that, you know, I don't understand Representative Boyd's motivations for this, but if you want to, I mean, I guess she's probably pro-abortion to start with, and this is one of those bills that starts eroding at the right to life, right? This is the kind of thing that chips away at that. But if
Yeah.
you truly believe that a life begins at conception, if you truly believe that it's a baby, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are, just as you said, Chris.
Yeah, and one other point I want to make about this bill, and this is something that's very troubling. Let's say there were a law in Louisiana that allowed abortion under circumstances where a young lady was raped or assaulted or anything of the like. Her bill, Boyd's bill, requires no proof on the part of the pregnant girl or the pregnant lady. No proof at all. No investigation is required to determine her veracity, to determine whether she's telling the truth about the circumstances of the pregnancy. No forensic evidence is required. No testimony is required. And no prosecution of the offender is required. All that's required is for a pregnant female, to say, I was raped, and that's it. And at face value, the bill would allow an abortion in that circumstances. So at a minimum, if you're going to allow abortion under these circumstances, there should be some element of proof required to determine whether in fact the pregnancy resulted from that circumstance.
Yeah, I think it's horrible all the way around,
Yeah.
and I know that you will be opposing this. I know our good friend Debbie Melvin will be opposing this as well.
The great Debbie Melvin.
Yeah. All right. Now we're going to take a turn to criminal and civil justice. There's some pretty interesting bills here. The first one is House Bill 457 by Representative Denise Marcel. She's a Democrat, and she's bringing this bill that talks about solitary confinement. And she's providing that there would be more humane circumstances related to people's incarceration in solitary confinement.
Exactly. One of the reasons why I find this bill very appealing, and I would doubt that this is the reason why Representative Marcel is bringing the bill, because she's not a conservative. I'm sure that she probably does not have a lot of natural sympathy for the J6 defendants. One of the reasons why I'm sensitive and like the bill is precisely because of the way the J6 defendants were treated when they were in solitary confinement. And the bill says that if a person is in solitary confinement, they have to have access to the same educational materials that they would have if they were not in solitary confinement. Whether they're studying for their GED, whether they're studying for a vocational school, or whatever they're doing to try to advance and improve themselves, those educational materials have to be provided to them even while they're in solitary confinement, and it has to be provided within 24 hours of them being placed in solitary confinement. I certainly believe that liberty is compromised and should be when a person is imprisoned. We compromise our liberty to a degree because of what we've done that put us in prison, but we still should have some measure of liberty and some basic decency afforded us. And the state is not doing itself any favors by completely curtailing an inmate's ability to continue to improve themselves simply because they're in solitary confinement. And so I think it's a very good bill. The only thing that the bill, Danielle, does not explicitly include is religious materials. We reached out to Representative Marcel, and she is open to amending the bill to specifically include faith and religious materials. And we think that would be a very good amendment.
Yeah, and I think it's important. We talked to Jake Lang. He's a J6er, Josh Pruitt. I don't know that Josh got thrown in solitary confinement, but Jake spent the vast majority of his time in solitary. And it's only right that people should have the ability, if you can't speak to another human, if you're completely isolated, you do have, I think, we still as Americans should have the right to be able to read the Word of God, to be able to read educational materials.
Yeah. And what you just said reminded me of what St. Paul said. One of my favorite quotes from St. Paul said, I may be imprisoned, but the word of God can never be imprisoned.
Hmm.
And I just love that. I don't know why it reminded me of that, but he's very powerful.
Yep. Well, Chris, the next bill up is one that you absolutely hate with the fire of a thousand suns. You've told me several times. Senate Bill 39 by Senator Jay Morris. And this one is removing liability for prisons, prison wardens, the state, if they don't let prisoners out on time. And to me, this is like if you've served your full sentence, this is a civil rights violation. You should be set free. You served your time, you get out. And it's not just a civil rights violation. You were also telling me before the show that it's a huge expense to the state.
The Department of Corrections, Danielle, has about a $1 billion budget, annual budget, if not more. Certainly, they can properly calculate the outdates of prisoners who've served their time and properly calculate when they're supposed to be released and release them.
I bet there's
Uh,
some software you could buy for that.
and absolutely, I bet you there is. A little background on this bill. The Department of Justice did a study on this in 2023 and found that 1 in 4 Louisiana inmates, 1 in 4 were held past their release dates by an average of a month of over detention, an
Sick.
average of a month, costing Louisiana taxpayers $2.5 million a year in housing costs for these inmates. The Fifth Circuit has called the problem of over detention in Louisiana an endemic issue, an endemic problem. And interesting, get this figure, Danielle. The 1 in 4 inmates released will have been locked up past their release dates for a collective total of 3,000 plus years in Louisiana when you add it all together. That is reprehensible. That is inexcusable. There comes a point in time, a sentence is a sentence, and when someone has served their time, they should be released. This bill will completely eliminate liability on the part of the state for what's false imprisonment. So you hold an inmate months and months past their release date, and there's no action that can be. And then instead of being able to look at the record and the sentencing record, which is very available, and seeing, okay, yeah, this is the outdate, they were held over, providing that paperwork, they would have to sue and get a judgment in court in order to impose liability on the state. And it just makes it so much more difficult. In fact, there's a provision of the bill that specifically says that no cause of action shall exist against the state, the department, or any officer or employee of the state arising from the failure to comply with the obligation to release an inmate when it's their due date, when it's their time. So this basically frees government officials from having to comply with the law. Do you want to rely on the government with no potential consequences to do what they're supposed to do and release inmates timely? I don't. I don't understand the legislation at all. I don't even understand what Senator Morris, what his objective is. I mean, it appears facially from looking at the bill that his objective is to immunize government officials from clear abuses of power and authority by holding inmates well past their outdate. So this is a terrible piece of legislation, and it should die. And I'm looking forward to testifying vigorously against it.
So what's amazing is that Senator Morris is not denying the problem. What he's doing is he's saying, instead of fixing the problem, instead of coming up with a workable solution, like perhaps an incentive program for wardens to be able to get people out on time, maybe you get a bonus if you get 10 people out on time. I don't know if it's costing us that many millions of dollars a year, but instead, let's just pretend like that's not the problem and we're not going to be found at fault, even though it is the problem.
Yeah.
It's a disgusting approach. And I would be interested to hear his take on.
And look, we're always open to hear if there's an explanation for it. But legislation like this, in light of the issue that we talked about that exists here, it should be as you said, creating incentives for complying with the law and making sure that inmates are released timely. And it should be creating an enforcement mechanism and penalties and a definitive process whereby this issue can be addressed when it occurs. But the bill does just the opposite.
This is third world crap, Chris. This is third world stuff here.
Yes, we don't live in a banana republic. The rule of law applies to people who've been convicted of crimes just as much as it applies to anybody else. Either we believe in the rule of law or we don't. And eliminating accountability in this situation is abhorrent. And we're going to oppose it vigorously.
Very vigorously. Maybe he'll withdraw it after hearing this.
Maybe so. Maybe we'll have a conversation with Senator Morris.
We've all had instances crop up where we could use the advice or skills of a trusted attorney. Whether you're looking at the implications of new laws for your business, signing a contract or a lease, looking to write a will or establish a trust, or even resolve a dispute with your credit card company, Legal Shield has got you covered. For over 50 years, Legal Shield has made it affordable and easy to access a dedicated lawyer. With the app, Legal Shield is like having a lawyer in your back pocket. For covered emergencies, Legal Shield is here for you 24/7, plans to fit any stage of life. The State of Freedom is proud to be teamed up with Legal Shield as clients and affiliates. To learn more or to sign up, visit the Shop Our Partners page on freedomstate.us or check out the link in the show notes. Thank you for supporting the State of Freedom. Okay, great. Next up is another bill that's very problematic. There's probably some room for it to get fixed. It's Senate Bill 148 by Senator Blake Miguez, and this is the one that's being touted as a loser pay bill.
Yeah, and I applaud Senator Miguez for trying to do something about these frivolous lawsuits, frivolous car wreck lawsuit cases. And I admire him more generally. I think he's an excellent legislator, one of the best that we have, and a very faithful conservative. But I think he's misguided on this. We've had a discussion about it before. I think he understands the concern. This legislation would require anytime someone brings a lawsuit for whatever purpose, if that lawsuit gets dismissed at some point, either early in the process or even later in the process, even after trial, if the judge reverses a verdict and dismisses it, the party bringing the suit would have to pay all the attorney's fees and all the costs of the defense. And I think that is a really bad policy for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that not every lawsuit that is dismissed is frivolous. Yes, there are lawsuits that are brought and the judge looks at it and dismisses it and says, this is absolutely frivolous. You're wasting my time. And yeah, oftentimes attorney's fees are awarded to the defense for having to even deal with it. I understand that, but many lawsuits are meritorious.
Chris, can I just ask you a question there? Lawsuits get thrown out on technicalities sometimes, right? So what if you have a subpar attorney and they miss something technically, so your lawsuit gets thrown out? Now you are in a position of having to pay the other person's, the potentially wrongful party's attorney fees in addition to your own because you had a bad attorney? Is that a situation that could arise?
It could, but only in very rare situations. The only
Okay.
real criminal cases involve technical issues much more so than civil cases. Really, the only technical issue that would result in a civil case being thrown out is if a case were filed after the statute of limitations ran. That's really
Okay.
the only incurable issue in a civil case. And in that case, if someone files a lawsuit that's obviously the statute of limitations is run, the law is very clear on that, then you could argue that that's frivolous and attorney's fees should be awarded to the other side. But most of the time in lawsuits, there are genuine issues being argued on both sides of it. And a judge often has to make difficult decisions, and a jury often has to make difficult decisions about who wins and who loses. And so just because someone loses a lawsuit is not grounds for an attorney or a to be stuck with tens of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees and costs. I don't think that's appropriate. And I think that Senator Miguez is aware of the concern and has even suggested that he would amend the bill to narrow it, to tailor it more narrowly. So he's not sweeping with such a broad brush. Nobody wants to get rid of frivolous suits in Louisiana more than I do. But I think this legislation is not the right avenue.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye on that. And of course, we'll be in touch with Senator Miguez. He brings good bills and does good work. So I'm sure he will be working with us on this one. Next up, we will be talking about a couple bills related to constitutional liberties. The first one is one that Representative Ray Cruz brought last year, House Bill 386 this year, and it is establishing gold and silver as currency.
Hugely popular in Louisiana, Danielle. As Representative Cruz has told us before, 9 out of 10 Louisiana citizens strongly support having gold and silver as transactional currency in Louisiana. You recall that the bill was brought last year. Treasurer Fleming testified in favor of it, sitting right beside Representative Cruz, and they made a very compelling argument for why this is so important in Louisiana, to give Louisiana citizens greater financial autonomy, greater financial stability, and an independent source of value other than the fiat dollar, which is losing value, it seems, daily.
Yeah.
So this is, remember the gold standard was the only standard for currency in the United States for many, many years before the Federal Reserve 1913 and the fiat dollar came about. So we are really pushing this legislation. It was defeated last year in committee for a couple of reasons, Danielle. I think one of the reasons is that the legislators on the committee really didn't understand it, really hadn't studied it. And another reason is that the bankers were lined up against it because
Yeah.
they don't want people pulling money out of their bank from which the banks are gaining interest on that money and converting it to gold and silver. They don't want to lose money, but that's not a legitimate reason to oppose it. And hopefully we'll get a better result on it this year.
Yeah, I hope we do get a better result on it this year, Chris. You know, you think about the bankers, and we've heard people talk on this show about how much fake money is lent on a daily basis from the banks. And so, yeah, of course there is a reason for them to oppose it. They have valid reason to oppose it. They are operating under an entire scam and Ponzi scheme that likely will come crashing down sometime if we are not put on a standard that has some sanity to it and has actual value and has true accounting standards. So yeah, the bankers have a real reason to be worried. I would be getting my little house in order and start operating by real standards instead of what's legally allowed, because if you're not doing real accounting, if you're counting 10, what was it, they're lending out $10 for every dollar, right? Is
Yeah.
that what?
Nine out of every $10 that you deposit in the bank, they can loan it out, get it back, and manipulate that money. 9 out of every $10 that you deposit.
And Chris, I heard an anecdote recently from a friend. It's actually, I think, my dad's friend, who said that he needed to purchase a transmission for his truck. He went and he purchased a used transmission because he had an old truck and whatever. So fast forward, he goes to the bank and he's like, I need to get $25,000 out. And they were like, do you mean cash? And he's like, well, I mean, I don't know what other kind of money you want me to get out of the bank. I have the money in my account. They're like, we don't have that cash on hand. What?
Oh my gosh.
What? Are you kidding me? Yes, the banks need to get their houses in order, and this bill needs to pass for the protection of our fiscal houses. You know, I mean, everybody needs to be investing, in my view, in gold and silver so that they can have a hedge against the dollar.
And use it as transactional currency, just with your debit card. Another reason, Daniel, why I think this is very important is because I think it could be the dagger in the heart of this central bank digital currency that has been pushed by the left, by the Biden administration, and really by globalists throughout the world who want to create one fiat currency and be able to surveil and regulate through digital surveillance our economic activity. And I think that passing this legislation would really undercut that effort.
I'm excited to share a fantastic opportunity for State of Freedom listeners who are interested in investing in precious metals or even starting a home-based business in the precious metals industry. Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. They are beating the big sites. They have no credit card fees and no minimums. If you're just interested in purchasing metals at a great price, visit metalstacks.com/DWalker Get to shopping. That helps me out. I get the commission. You can also refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income. If you're interested in learning about the referral business aspect of Metal Stacks, email me directly at danielle@freedomstate.us for more information. Yeah, I would certainly hope so. So we'll see. We'll be supportive of that again, but I don't look. You can say that it's my tin hat, but I don't trust the banks. I do not trust them. Next up, under this banner of constitutional liberties, is a bill by Senator Greg Miller that has gotten under my skin. Chris, we've heard from you the one that's gotten under your skin with the Jay Morris bill, but this one really got my goat. Senate Bill 80. And it's about exit polling. It doesn't seem like it would be that horrible, but what it's doing is it's trying to prohibit citizens from conducting informal or formal exit polling by limiting the right to government sanctioned quote unquote journalists. So the government has to say who can conduct exit polling. Well, I'm sorry. Does the government own the elections, or do the people own the elections? Is the voice of the people the elections, or is the voice of the government the elections? No, Senator Miller. This is not constitutional.
Well said, Danielle. The legislation restricts exit polling to what he defines in the bill as a bona fide journalist or news media organization. And it limits the subject matter that you can ask about. How did you vote in the election that you just voted on? How did you vote? I just think that to the extent that the people are sovereign, why should this activity be limited to, quote, a bona fide journalist or news organization? The average American citizen, an average Louisiana citizen, should have just as much access and just as much ability to conduct an exit poll within appropriate parameters without disrupting anything and in a calm and respectful way as any bona fide journalist should be able to do.
Well,
So this is
yeah.
unconstitutional.
And furthermore, when media is meant to be a balance against the government, and we know they haven't been in recent years, they've been an arm of the CIA, they've been the fourth arm of the government. But why should we trust the government to tell us who the sanctioned journalists are? To me, that's just an affront as well. We all have, the truth is incumbent on all of us to say and to report. That's the government. Senator Miller doesn't get to say who the journalists are.
No. And there are a lot of very good citizen journalists out there who've done a lot of great work and gathered tremendous information that the legacy traditional news media has completely ignored.
Yeah.
So that's another reason. So I just think this is a bad piece of legislation. Again, I don't understand the motive for it, but we are going to be vigorously opposing it.
We absolutely will. Next up is House Bill 426 by Representative Wilford Carter. And Chris, you liked this one a lot because it codifies the right to the presumption of innocence.
Yeah. The Constitution, Danielle, already requires, obviously establishes the presumption of innocence and other core protections for people who are accused of crimes. But this bill simply codifies that when someone has been arrested and they're in jail awaiting a bond, the judge has to take into consideration, it'll be by statutory law now, the presumption of innocence, the fact that the accused is presumed innocent, has been convicted of no crime, and the judge must consider that as a factor in determining the amount of bond and whether he's eligible for bond. So anytime core constitutional requirements are codified in statute, as well as being in the Constitution, I endorse it and support it, especially the presumption of innocence, particularly when you look over the past 3 or 4 years at all of the lawfare that we've seen, all of the politically concocted and manufactured charges against so many different Americans who were innocent of what they were accused of. I think the presumption of innocence is critically important, and this codifies that right in statutory law. So I'm very, very happy with the bill. Wilford Carter, by the way, is a Democrat. We may not agree with him on a whole lot of things, but we certainly agree with him on this.
Yep. We've been lining up with the Democrats a lot on criminal justice issues, and
We
it
have.
looks like we will continue to. So we'll just call them balls and strikes like we see them, huh?
As we see it.
Yep. All right. Next up is a big strike in my book, Chris, yours too. House Bill 519 by Representative Brian Glorioso, who's a great legislator. I like him a lot. But he has resurrected the cockroach. He brought it back with some changes. It's not quite as horrible as it once was, but in our view, it is a one-way ticket to higher insurance premiums and is really, anti-personal liberties.
Very much so. We were both hoping, Danielle, that we wouldn't see even a modified version of the cockroach bill this session. We
They love
thought
it.
we thought we had put it to bed once and for all, but no, it is still squirming around on the ground. And so this bill, once again, would create penalties for talking on a handheld cell phone in your vehicle with very limited exceptions. If you're an emergency vehicle and you've got to use it for something, if you're reporting something that someone looks like they may be dying or in imminent danger, you can use it. But absent those circumstances, it is you would be imposed with a civil penalty and cited for talking on a handheld cell phone in your vehicle. Now, the big problem that we have with this bill, a couple of big problems. The first one is that it would go down as a moving violation. The bill says, "Oh, don't worry, you don't have to show up for court. You can just pay your fine and you won't be inconvenienced. It's either a 50 or $100 fine or something like that you pay," which, okay. But the problem is the bill says it goes on your record as a moving violation. And I've helped enough people with speeding tickets over the years to know that if this goes on an insured's record as a moving violation, their insurance rates will be jacked up and probably substantially jacked up. That's a huge problem with the bill. The second problem with the bill is that even though this is not considered a primary violation, the bill says that law enforcement can't pull a motorist over only because they see them talking on a handheld cell phone. They have to have another reason to stop them. And if they stop them for that other legitimate reason, then they can cite them as well for talking on the handheld cell phone. The problem with that is that not all law enforcement officers are honest, they're not all scrupulous, and there are times when police officers create pretexts to stop people when they really don't have any other reason, but they see them on their handheld cell phone and they fabricate a reason for it. The second big problem with the bill is that it creates a precedent, even though this bill says that when you stop someone and you're citing them for talking on their handheld cell phone, you can't engage in any further infringements of their freedom. You can't seize their phone and look at their text messages. You can't go into their vehicle. You can't do anything. You are limited to this. Nonetheless, again, police officers sometimes create pretexts to do just that and then manufacture reasons. So the bill creates a precedent that could lead to further infringements of freedom and liberty. And we have to be very, very careful about that. And the very practical reason why we oppose the bill, Danielle, is because, as Ed Tarpley testified in committee, every single time this cockroach bill has been brought forward, there is no statistical evidence that suggests a correlation between talking on a handheld cell phone in your vehicle and increased traffic accidents. There's no evidence. So if for no other reason, there's no reason for the bill. There's just no reason for it because there's no reason to believe that it would lead to reduced traffic accidents. So for all of the reasons that you and I have addressed many, many times before, we oppose this bill and we're going to fight it just as vigorously as we always do. And maybe by God's holy grace and some hard work, Cockroach will finally die.
Yeah. Well, if it does, when it does, we'll call you the exterminator, Chris.
I love it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And just a reminder, there's already a law in the books that says there's no texting and driving, right? So you can already be pulled over for a violation of texting while driving. You can get ticketed for that if you cause an accident because you were texting and driving. So this is not that. This is something separate.
Something completely separate.
Yeah.
And Daniel, you made an interesting point, not to belabor this, but we were talking about this pre show. Under this rationale, if you can cite someone for talking on a handheld cell phone, by that logic, you should be able to cite someone who's got a passenger in their vehicle while they're driving, and they look over and they're distracted and they're talking to their passenger and not looking at the road. What's
Yeah.
the difference?
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, we'll leave that one there for now. We'll let cockroaches lie for the moment being
And squirm.
and swarm. Yeah. Okay. Government transparency. There's a couple good government transparency bills. We're only going to talk about one, I think, today, Chris. And this is perhaps one of the most important bills of the session, in our view. House Bill 471 being brought by Representative Kathy Edmonston. And this is a constitutional amendment that would codify the single object rule, which we say, Chris, I believe, has to be in direct response to the tremendous citizen outcry of the 115-page proposed constitutional amendment number 2 that got struck down. I mean, it got smacked down on March 20th.
Smacked down by 65% of Louisiana voters. The ballot language on Constitutional Amendment 2, Danielle, was a jumbled, disjointed mess. And it involved too many issues. It put people in a position of having to choose between a teacher pay raise and eliminating constitutional protection for religious organizations. That's one of the main reasons why the Constitution requires only one object on a ballot, so people don't have to make those Hobson choices between one issue that they like and one issue that they don't like. So the Constitution currently says that if you're amending an entire article, then you can put multiple objects on a ballot. This proposed constitutional amendment by Representative Edmonston says that even if you are seeking to amend an entire article in the Constitution, you can only put one object, one issue on the ballot.
Beautiful.
And it clarifies the issue. It makes it easier for the voter, and there's no doubt that this is in direct. In fact, Representative Edmondson told me that this is in direct response from outcry from her constituents about never allowing this to happen again in the state of Louisiana. So it is a very important constitutional amendment, and it will just make it easier going forward and make the government more transparent going forward when it comes to the language they put forward on constitutional amendments.
Yeah. Well, I'm so pleased that she heard from her constituents and responded with this. I think it's a great bill and it's closing a loophole, as you mentioned. So that's important. We'll be supporting it, we'll be following it, and I hope we see the governor support it.
I hope so too. That and many, many other items of legislation
Yeah.
that'll be coming forward.
Exactly. Okay, I think this is the last topic, but we got a couple bills in this bucket, so bear with us. This is getting us over to the end of preview part 2, but this issue item, I guess, is efficiency, accountability, contracts, and DOTD operations. So it's kind of wide ranging, but you'll see how it all fits together shortly. The first bill up in this section is House Bill 421 by Representative Emily Chenevert. And this bill is getting DEI out of all state agencies, full stop.
Yeah, it is a very, very comprehensive legislation that just abolishes this leftist, Marxist, globalist diversity, equity, and inclusion, critical race theory, and all of the other bizarre theories that have been put forward and have been permeating not only our schools, but all of our public institutions
Yeah.
over the past number of years. Abolishes it entirely. Not only does it abolish it, it requires that the public agencies put forward proof, provide to the state and who the to the commissioner of administration, showing their compliance with the law. Here's what we've done to comply with this mandate to abolish this leftist ideology in our employment institutions, any public institution in Louisiana. So it's very, very important. And Representative Chenevert is just a real patriot for bringing this because it's high time. I mean, this poison that has just infested our public institutions is got to die. It's got to go, and this bill will absolutely do it.
It will do it. And Chris, as we were talking before the show, just going over all the different bills that we were going to be bringing today, we discussed the possibility of seeing if she would amend it to also include contractors who use DEI, because I don't think that if we believe that DEI is a discriminatory practice and anti-civil liberties, then we should not be spending taxpayer money with third-party contractors who are discriminatory. Period.
Yeah, could not agree with you more. It's arguable, Danielle, that because the bill is so comprehensive and mandates the abolishment of any and all traces of DEI, whether it's in employment criteria or performance requirements, that possibly any contracts with third parties that include that language or that criteria would be implicit in the bill. But I certainly think, out of an abundance of caution, an express provision that any existing contracts with the state or any of these agencies that involve DEI, critical race theory, and that sort of thing are terminated.
Well, I just mean that those contractors cannot have DEI practices in their organization. I don't mean it being specific to the contract itself.
That's a great point. So you're saying a provision that would prohibit contracting with any third party that uses this criteria, either in hiring or in performance or in any other facet of their organization. We
Yeah,
would be
because they
prohibited.
exactly, because they would then be de facto government employees, right? I mean, in a manner of speaking.
Well, they would certainly be benefiting from our
Yeah,
tax dollars.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think that's something that we should talk to Representative Chenevert about.
yeah. The next bill up, Chris, is Senate Bill 166, and there's another one similar to it that we'll get to after that. But this is a bill that I am pretty excited about, being brought by Senator Glenn Womack, and it is imposing requirements on local government entities for contracting on any public works when state funds are used. And there's
Yeah,
some software requirements that go along with it.
yeah. This anytime any state funds, even if it's not state money that is funding the whole project, if state funds are even being used in a public work project between a local government and a third party contractor, there are certain requirements that they have to go through. So this is essentially a bill that is designed to make performance of these projects more efficient, more timely, and more cost effective. And one of the requirements that's being imposed is that there's a mandatory pre-construction meeting with certain criteria that have to be met, meeting between the contractor, the local government entity, and personnel from the state of Louisiana to determine cost estimates, projected completion times, and other issues relating to the progress and the completion of the project. Project deadlines, accountability standards are in the bill, payment schedules, and that sort of thing. So everything is very clearly lined out before the project even starts. So people know what they're doing, what's expected of them, and when we can expect the project to be completed. There's the bill also sets up, Danielle, a software system where all of the parties at issue have access to every document, every cost estimate, every estimated time of completion, where it's all in one central database so they can all see it, so they have ready access to all of the documentary materials that they need. And I think that's another thing that will really hopefully expedite the efficient completion of these projects. But I love the idea that they have to lay the groundwork and do the advanced planning in a very significant and meaningful way before the project even starts.
Yeah.
So this is a very good bill. I kind of liken it to Senator Valerie Hodges' bill that we will talk about, that is also designed to expedite these projects and make them more efficient.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and get into that? And you know, I have some strong feelings about it as well, so I'll chime in.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that Senator Hodges says in this bill, that it is in the public interest that the completion of these state road projects become more efficient, more expedient, more cost effective, and that the people who are involved in these projects are held accountable for these unnecessarily delays, unnecessary expenditure of our money. I mean, you got a bridge. Comes to my mind, the Berg Bridge, and I know you're going to talk about it, but I'll let you talk about that in a minute. But one of the things this bill does, it imposes a contracting method called A plus B bidding method. And any potential contractor has to put up A, which is the cost of the project, a definitive estimate of the cost, and B, the time that's going to be required to complete the project. And they're going to be held to that standard during the course of the project. The bill also limits these change orders. One of the things that causes these projects to take forever to end is because of the constant change orders that are being saying, well, we need to change this, or we need to do this, or we need to do that, or we need more money for this. And so it will also limit those change orders in it as well. Really, Valerie Hodges is infuriated. I can't remember what item of construction it is out in Livingston Parish that has literally taken forever to complete. But that is what motivated this bill. And she says there's got to be accountability. They can't take forever to complete these projects.
I'll tell you, Chris, I emailed DOTD to find out what in the world was going on with our community bridge, the Berg Bridge here. When the first response from DOTD was not satisfactory, I responded and said these contractors need to be held accountable. I mean, what is the mechanism for them to never be allowed to get a contract again? And I learned from you the term debarment, and I think we need to involve debarment in Senator Hodges' bill and in and Senator Womack's bill, because there needs to be a recognition that being a contractor with the state is a privilege and not a right, and you don't get to screw up this bad and get another contract with the state. Period.
Exactly,
Period.
exactly. There are certain circumstances where a contractor should be permanently excluded from contracting with the state. Yeah, and that's debarment.
What I did hear from DOTD was that there are 400 down bridges in the state of Louisiana right now. That's a staggering statistic for you. And when I said that 4 years for a community bridge was outrageous, DOTD told me that it could be worse. There's a worse project in Livingston Parish. So I'm sure that's the one that Senator Hodges was talking about, but I couldn't even respond. I just wanted to stutter because I was like, I think I blacked out a little bit whenever they said it could be worse. I was like, this is not the kind of response you need to be getting from a government bureaucrat. You need to be getting a response of we are on it. Now, I did talk to Senator Facey about this because I've been livid, and you might see the steam coming out of my ears now. But Senator Facey has been under a lot of pressure from, neighbors, friends and neighbors to get this bridge situation figured out. And he has said, hey, wouldn't it make a lot of sense if before they pulled the bridge out, that they made sure that all of the equipment for the bridge, all of the pieces of the bridge have been ordered, maybe even make sure that they're all arrived, because why should you lose use of a bridge that is able to be traveled on just because you're going to build another bridge? Right now, they said that the reason for the last delays is because they're waiting for the signal package to come in, the red light package. Like at some point, whenever they started this project 4 years ago, plus, they didn't think, oh, we're going to need to replace the stinking red lights. Are you kidding me? So we're going to be 2 more months delayed because of a red light package? It's completely unacceptable. And this will go a long way to fixing that.
Yes, these bills related to the construction of roads or in public works are ultimately designed, Danielle, to create more efficiency and more accountability in the process, and that's why they're so very important. One last thing I want to say about Valerie Hodges' bill, and I think this will help. It's not the debarment provision that we think would be ideal, but there is a provision in her legislation that provides significant financial economic incentives for completing projects before the deadline. And there are significant disincentives and penalties for going over the completion deadline. So I think that is important. Again, it's not you don't have the specter of debarment hanging over your head in this bill, but it certainly does provide for some significant incentives and disincentives to complete things timely and efficiently.
Yeah, and for all my neighbors in Berg that have been plagued by this Berg Bridge issue, I just want to also mention that Senator Facey is trying to get all of the penalty fees. They're getting penalized $10,500 every single day. This contractor is that they are overdue, and so they've been racking this up for quite some time now. And he is trying to get all of that money earmarked for the repair of Country Drive, which is the road that got beat beyond recognition because it's the only thoroughfare people could travel on in an alternative path to where this bridge is. So it's completely destroyed that road, which was in poor shape to start with.
Yeah. Do you think that when do you anticipate the Berg Bridge will be finished?
Well, according to DOTD's last response to my email in my email exchange, the end of May, which is just outrageous,
Yeah.
outrageous.
May
But
of
it better be. Yeah, May of
2028.
it better not be. It better not be. There's this great meme that my friend put on Facebook not too long ago. It was Doc and Marty McFly looking at the car, and he said, I went to the future, Marty, you'll never guess what. The Berg Bridge is still not done. Anyway, we're hoping that Joe Donahue is turning things around over there at DOTD. These provisions by Senator Hodges and Senator Womack will hopefully take us in the right direction. I certainly know that citizens across the state are ready for real reform when it comes to DOTD. They've had far too much autonomy and too little accountability for all you have to do. You can't even drive down the road in Houma with a hot cup of coffee. So it's time for change. It's absolutely time for change. And Representative Boriak seems to be the person who's had the fortitude to bring something really, really extensive when it comes to the remake of DOTD. His House Bill 528 looks like it was trying to reform, restructure, I don't know, and reorganize really the DOTD to make it more efficient. It's a very extensive bill, and it's going to take a lot of work to make that happen, I'm afraid.
Yeah, because it really is absolutely comprehensive. As you said, Danielle, it reforms the whole organizational structure of the DOTD, streamlines different divisions, and makes people more accountable for what they're supposed to be doing. This is a massively long bill. The digest on this bill was like 6 or 7 pages. The digest. The bill itself is monstrous. It's not on the level of Constitutional Amendment 2, but it is
It's up there.
close. Yeah, so it is a real effort to reform DOTD to make it more efficient and more accountable to the citizens. So we're going to support this legislation and probably testify in favor of it as well.
Yeah, great. Well, Chris, that rounds us out. I am very hopeful about this session. I know you are as well. There's a lot of things that would stand to put our state in better position, and I think there's some things that we can get fixed to be even better. We mentioned a lot of potential amendments to some of these bills already, but we are set to go off to the races on Monday. Monday, we're back in session, and just a couple of announcements for the show here. Tuesday at 10, we'll have Ryan Mata back. Well, he hasn't come on yet, but he is JJ Carroll's partner in their documentaries about trafficking. So we're very much looking forward to him. He has been a relentless voice for truth and demanding accountability from the government for the heinous acts that it has really perpetrated on people from across the world and American citizens. And then on Thursday, we'll be connecting with Representative Julie Emerson at 10 a.m. And I think she'll want to be talking to us a little bit about what went down with CA2 and the intent there, and then probably what to expect in the session ahead. I think Chris, she's on appropriations. not appropriations. It's another one.
Ways and Means.
Ways and Means. So she'll be wanting to talk about some of the spending bills as well, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
And one of the things that I'm going to want to talk to her about is the abolition of the individual state income tax, because it's her committee that would have to pass that out of committee. There's no pending legislation to abolish the state income tax now, but there was last year. So that's something that's on the top of our priority list to get that
Yeah.
done,
Yeah.
and also
And
to
the
begin
other
to
thing I'd
streamline
like to,
government.
sorry.
And also begin to streamline government and do a real Doge in Louisiana. As Treasurer Fleming yesterday, and I was disappointed to hear it, as we said earlier, that he does not really see the vigorous effort that is occurring on the federal level to get that
Yeah.
done here.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd like to raise with her is the accountability measures that Treasurer Fleming is putting into place, that he has put in place with the education department. So some transparency, I don't know, technology that brings transparency to the full suite of appropriations that the state makes. Yeah, we've got a lot to talk about. Stay tuned. And of course, please, please, please sign up for the action alerts at lacag.org. Make sure that you are on the mailing list there, and we will be keeping you abreast of how things are moving through the legislature, what's important, and how we recommend everyone vote.
And subscribe and share the State of Freedom, Danielle. And I think, Danielle, I think it's appropriate today, since I haven't done this in a long time, to do a little throwback here and simply say that, we've made so much progress moving forward. Not too long ago, by FeedSpot, we were voted the third most popular, important political podcast in Louisiana, rapidly rising in the ranks. We're so thankful to our listeners and so thankful to all the people who subscribe and support the State of Freedom. We are only loyal to the citizens and to the Constitution. Everything we look at is through the prism of what protects the citizens, the ordinary Louisiana citizens, and what is adherent to the Constitution. That's it. And we're so thrilled to be able to say that and believe that we've been consistent to that pledge from the very, very beginning. And with your help, all of our listeners, and with God's holy grace, Danielle, this session and every day, we're going to take another grand step to preserve the great state of freedom in Louisiana.
Amen. Thank you, Chris. That was a good one.
Love you.
Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org. We'll see you next time. God bless.